Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, and in this video, since we are approaching the end of 2024, I figured I would share with you what has been in my bag, or I guess technically in my cart, as I am pro cart. I am very much hashtag cart life, saves the back, highly recommend it actually. But anyway, I just figured maybe people might be curious what I bag if you follow this channel, or even if you don't follow this channel regularly, you know, if you kind of wondered what it was like for an amateur player who was represented by Infinite Disc, who therefore gets to throw an open bag, but also obviously I like to support Infinite Disc because they support me and I do like their molds. See some of the Infinite molds I have mixed in throughout my open bag as well. Now, I did one earlier this year and not a whole lot has changed since then, but there have been some key changes. And so I figured I'd just do an updated in the bag. People seem to always like these kinds of videos. I always like watching them myself, just curious what people throw. So without further ado, let's get into it. So kicking things off, we'll start with my putting putters, and these are classic hybrid deputies. So the deputy is actually the first putter I ever used when I first started playing disc golf just before COVID, when I was kind of dabbling in the sport, but before I really committed to it fully, which when COVID hit is when I really started playing regularly and eventually made this channel and even started doing some work in disc golf and all that jazz. And I had switched to the Fierce, kind of after using the deputy for a while, just because of the hype, I guess. But I've fallen back on the deputies because the Fierce is just really expensive to replace, to be honest, and they also don't come in a lot of different plastic options. Whereas the deputy, I can switch out the plastics depending on the time of year or weather if I need to, if my hands are feeling kind of sticky or they're feeling maybe a little bit too stiff. Depending on the weather, I can change out plastics to solve all those different problems, and they're just cheaper to purchase. And what I really like about the deputy is that it's shallow, it's low profile. It has a slightly more beveled edge to it than something like a Luna or a Fierce, which is a little bit more rounded, so I kind of like that as well. And it doesn't have a bead. It's a pretty straight flyer, maybe even slightly on the more understable end, so I don't really have to worry about, at longer putting ranges, aiming a little bit to the right, letting it hyzer in if I was putting something more overstable like a P2 or whatever the case may be. These are just point and shoot putters, and yeah, I use them for every distance. Now let's get into some of my throwing putters, which I have basically 3 that I backhand, and then I have 2 approach discs for forehands. And so first one is going to be a base plastic proxy. This is actually not that different than the deputy, to be honest, so I can even kind of put this into the fold when I'm practicing putting. But I wanted to have one in base plastic, so I make sure that I have an understable throwing putter. So that's exactly what this is. It's an understable throwing putter, great hand feel, again, shallow, no bead, and just does what I need it to do. Can throw it flat, make it do turnovers, can do standstill shots for, some turnover type backhands. I can also throw on a touch of hyzer and get straight shots, and yeah, I just really like it. Then for a little bit of a bump up, I have the soft neutron proxy. So this is just a little bit more stable than the base plastic one. Flies a bit straighter, doesn't have as much turn, although this is getting beat in pretty well nowadays, so this actually does have a little bit more turn than it used to. So I may eventually cycle in a new soft neutron proxy and then just kind of take the base plastic one out, just because this one is starting to flip on me a pretty good bit. But in general, I just use these, throwing putters for mostly up shots, usually 200 feet or less. I can sometimes push these to 225 to 250, but I don't really throw putters that far. I don't throw anything that far. But just a good solid straight up shot disc. And then something that has a little bit more stability to it, I have the Proton Prism Envy, which is, the Eagle McMahon release when he first joined the team. I used to bag a Eclipse Envy, and I found these are pretty similar, maybe even in some cases a little bit more overstable than some Eclipse Envies I have thrown. And so this is kind of my more straight to overstable backhand throwing putter. If I throw it flat, it will definitely give me some fade that sometimes my proxy won't give me. I can throw it on a little bit of ante and get mini flexes out of it. And yeah, again, mostly used for up shots, but I will use it off the tee, in that 225-ish range or less if I'm playing a shorter par 3. But yeah, that is kind of my main backhand disc on the putter end. Finally, to round out this putt and approach category, I have 2 discs that I lean on for my forehand up shots, and that is going to be the A2 from Prodigy. In the past, I used to throw a zone, but I really like the A2 because it's just more shallow, and so it fits in my hand a little bit more nicely, just comfort-wise whenever, I'm going for a flick. I can also occasionally use these as an overstable backhand approach disc if the Envy's not overstable enough, but I mostly use these for forehand up shots. This is going to be in the 500 Spectrum plastics. This is a straighter flyer. On a forehand, I even get a little bit of turn out of it if I release it flat, and then I still get the reliable fade at the end though. And if I throw it on hyzer, it's going to hold that nice pushing hyzer angle. And then I have the 750 A2, which is just a more overstable version than the 500 A2, so this can handle wind a little bit better. I can do some flex lines with this a little bit better. And you know, I can kind of use these up to about 250 feet or so. I feel pretty comfortable in that range with these, maybe a little further. I haven't really tried to throw them super powerfully. I mostly use them for forehand up shots or maybe some like short forehand par threes that are under 250 feet. But yeah, the A2 has definitely become a staple in my bag when it comes to the approach game, particularly with forehands. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about mid-ranges, and I have 4 main mid-ranges, and then I have a utility mid-range. And I'll kind of point out these utility discs in this video because utility discs are discs I don't use very often, but I do have them in the bag just in case. So just want to point that out. And also you'll notice I have a lot of discs in my bag, but I do that mostly for, you know, redundancy for practice. Since I have a cart and it's not a huge back strain, I like to have extra disc or discs that fly pretty similar so that if I'm going out and practicing a course and I rip a disc and doesn't really go well, I have another one I can throw that's very similar so I can practice that shot again without having to go and fetch a disc. So that's most of the reason why I have a lot of discs, and why there's a lot of overlap is really for practice purposes, but just figured I'd throw that out there. But the first mid-range we'll talk about is the uplink. This is my main understable mid-range. I can throw this up to 300 feet, maybe a little bit further. Just exactly what you think it is. It's just one of those discs I can release flat. It's going to slow turn the entire time. If I release it on a touch of hyzer, I can get the hyzer flipped with just a little bit of turn, so I can manipulate the angles. I can also throw it, you know, high on Annie if I want like a huge sweeping pan over, understable, you know, just flip over backhand basically. I used to bag the Midnight Prowl in this slot, but I kind of wanted to get away from limited edition disc and kind of throw more stock discs just because they're easier to get your hands on. As you can see, I have plenty of disc up here, which by the way, if you're interested in this, I can go through the collection, but a lot of these are backups for disc in my bag mostly, and then some of them are my fiance's disc, and then some of them are just stuff that I've won or that I've gotten for free from friends, and some of it's stuff I've bought, some of the stuff I'm selling. So, you know, it is what it is. That is my disc corner, so to speak. But yeah, the uplink is going to be my main understable mid-range. Then for a couple more mid-ranges, I have 2 Pathfinders in the bag. One is this Ethos Pathfinder, which is the Proton Plastic from MVP that I've been throwing for a really long time, so it's pretty seasoned at this point. It's not as understable as the uplink, but if I throw it flat, it definitely gets some turn. But it will kind of pan out, whereas the uplink will kind of just keep turning. And if I throw this on hyzer, it's just like a dead straight shot. Just like a slight bit of hyzer. If I throw it on a lot of hyzer, I can get that nice pushing forward hyzer shot as well. So very versatile mid-range. It's probably my most used mid-range for that reason. Then I have this Glow Pathfinder, which just has a little bit more integrity than the season one. It actually has a little bit of fade to it at the end of its flight as well. So if I throw this flat, it's not really going to turn too much, maybe a little bit, but it's going to get that fade at the end of the flight. So this is just a really good combo of straight flying disc with this one just having a touch more finish and can handle a little bit more torque. So those are my main mid-ranges. Now finally, for my last main mid-range, I have a Proton Prism Pyro. I use this a lot for forehand, so if the A2 is not going to get there, then that's when I would bump up to the Pyro to get that little bit of extra distance. I can push that Pyro a little bit further, you know, 250 for sure, but I can maybe sometimes even get this like 275 or 280. So mostly what I use it for, but I can also use it for headwinds if I want to throw a shot that flies a little bit straighter, but I think the headwind's going to kind of mess with my Pathfinders. That's when I'll go to the Pyro. I can also throw this on flex backhands if I want a nice overstable mid-range for backhands. This is going to serve its purpose, and yeah, that's mostly what I use it for. And then finally, last of the mid-ranges, this is a utility disc, and that is the Justice from Dynamic Disc. If you know anything about this disc, you know it is a brick. It has no glide. It's super overstable, but that's where I really like it. I can throw it for just a lot of different utility shots, whether it's fighting headwinds. If I feel like my A2 or Pyro, the headwind's just going to be a little bit too much, I can throw my Justice and know it's going to fight through the headwind, mostly for forehands. But I can also use this for like skip shots or just, you know, low distance shots where I really need hard finish. This disc doesn't get used a lot, but I'm happy to have it whenever I need it for windy conditions or very specific utility shots. All right, so now let's get into some fairways, and we'll start with some of my utility fairway discs. So first I got a Tournament Underworld, and then I have an Ethos Mantra, which is the Proton Classic MVP. These are my super understable fairway drivers. Best way to put it, these are mostly used for getting out of jail, scramble shots, or rollers. If there's a big tailwind, I might throw it for that to get like a nice straight shot if I feel like a tailwind's gonna stable out one of my other fairways a little bit too much. So if these don't see too much action, again, mostly for rollers or really just like touchy, scrambly shots, I feel like there's always room for a super understable disc in your bag, and that's basically what these discs are, to just, you know, help me get out of tough situations or to lay down a roller. Now for some of my main fairway drivers, we'll start with the kind of step up instability. So that is going to be my Saints and Saint Pro. So I have this Saint, which is super seasoned, very understable, not as understable as the Mantra or the Underworld, but it's something that if I throw it flat to slight hyzer, it's going to fly straight and then just get a little bit of drifting turn pretty much the entire shot. I really like to use this disc in the woods whenever I do have a shot that's kind of bending left to right, but it's not severe enough for a forehand, but I still want that turnover play. This is a great disc for that. I can also throw it on some hyzer to get a dead straight shot, like different tunnel shots and stuff like that. And honestly, it flies almost as far as anything else that I throw, so I can even get kind of max distance on this thing. So yeah, this is a super helpful disc for me. Then a step up is this other gold line Saint. It's just not as old. It flies a little bit straighter, a little bit less turn. I'd call it straight to understable, basically. Just a little bit of a step up from that orange one. I mostly use this for dead straight shots. And then I have the Saint Pro. And the Saint Pro essentially just gives me a little bit more integrity than the Saints. It doesn't have nearly as much turn as the actual gold line Saints. This has, with it being the Saint Pro, just flies straight with a little bit of fade at the end. So this is kind of like my most neutral fairway driver, I guess you could say. Speaking of neutral fairway drivers, something that's a little bit slower, but something that I trust just as much as a mid-range, is going to be my Explorers. One is this Gold Line Explorer. This is basically just a longer version of my Pathfinder. Super straight, maybe a little bit of turn, but mostly straight shot, maybe a touch of fade at the end. And if I need something that has a little bit more fade at the end, I have this Opto X Explorer. And so this is just a disc I can throw, trust it just as much as I can trust my Pathfinders. And it's gonna get a nice straight push with a little bit of fade at the end, and it's just really nice for that like 300-foot shot or something like that I want straight, not too much turn, get some good finish. That's what this disc is for, this just being a super straight shooter. Now next up, for some more, I guess, overstable fairway drivers, I have the Halo Dynasty, which the best way I can describe this is it probably flies similar to what people would think of for a Thunderbird. Pretty straight, but has finish. You know, most of those other discs are just kind of straight flyers with very minimal fade, like the Explorers, for example, or some of the Saints. But this has that nice, dependable fade, and if I throw on a touch of hyzer, it's going to pop up a little bit, but never really turn, and flies super straight, and then get some finish at the end. Really love this disc, you know, for those more overstable backhands in that fairway slot. I can also use this for some forehands, like straighter forehands. So if I release this nice and flat, it's going to get a straight flight and then get a bit of finish. If I give it a touch of ante, it's going to give me like a nice pan left for most of the flight and then kind of just barely finish at the end. So I can kind of use it in that regard as well. But I mostly use this for kind of straighter forehands or a more overstable backhand for my arm speed. Then next up, to finish off the 9 speeds, before we get to like these weird in-between discs, I have 2 Felons in the bag. First one is going to be the Orbit Felon. This one is just a nice overstable 9-speed. It's exactly what you want it to be. Some people throw Firebirds in this slot. Some people throw the FX2 in this slot if you're a Prodigy person. I guess this would be like a Raptor if you're a Discraft person. But this is just my overstable 9-speed of choice. I like it. It's low profile. It feels great in the hand. Mostly a forehand disc for me. I can even throw this on nice flex lines with some ante, or if I throw it flat, it's just going to get a pushing hyzer basically the entire flight. So just a tick up instability from that Halo Dynasty. And I can also do this on some flex backhands if need be, or to fight headwinds with a backhand if need be. And then this is a utility disc. So kind of like the Justice or kind of like my, you know, Underworld and Mantra. It doesn't get used a lot, but man, do I love to have it when I need it. This is just a beefcake 9-speed. Kind of reminds me of something like a Splice or like a Captain's Raptor, or, you know, just one of those more overstable 9-speeds, but this is the Felon's version. This is like a Lucid X. So this is mostly for flex forehands when I really need to do a flex shot, and I feel like this one might hold over left too much. If I can really just throw this on like chop angles basically and still get it to fight out, fight headwinds, skip shots, you know, different things like that. Like if I need the occasional overhand scramble shot, this is good for that too. So yeah, these are my Felons. Really love to have them. Now, I don't know what you would consider these because these are 10 speeds and I don't really use them that often. I'm mostly just kind of testing these. So the first one's the Trail, which has been a disc that just came out very recently as I'm making this video. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna bag this permanently, but I just kind of threw it in there because I'm trying it out. It's very similar to my Saint Pro. Maybe a tick faster though. And this could be potentially a max distance disc for me. For my arm speed, a 10 speed is probably like the perfect place to stop, honestly. So this could be like a max distance driver for me at some point, and I may trim some other disc out the bag because of that, but I just haven't thrown this enough to like be super comfortable with it. But so far, it's just like a longer Explorer or a longer Saint Pro for me. It definitely has some turn, but it can still straighten out at the end of its flight. Doesn't have too much fade, so it just kind of fits somewhere in that like longer Explorer, longer Saint type slot for me right now. It probably overlaps with the Saint a good bit, to be honest with you, but it's good to have for redundancy for practice. And this eventually could just be something that once I learn it more, it might find more value in my bag over time. I feel like I can also throw this, just, it feels comfortable in my hand for like hyzer flip forehands that'll, you know, kind of flip up, get some left turn and just kind of fly straight. So I've been kind of experimenting with it for that too. So yeah, the Trail's in the bag. And then finally, I have a Halo Aztec. So this would be similar to say like an Orc if you're an Innova person. It's a 10 speed, but it kind of flies somewhere in between my Felon and that Halo Dynasty. I use this mostly for backhands where it's a little bit faster than the Dynasty, but it has a similar flight where it doesn't really have much turn. It mostly just flies straight, but it does have some finish at the end, which I really like to have. So it's kind of on that stable to overstable end for me, and it's in a 10 speed. But it doesn't really feel that much faster than a Fairway, so I still kind of label it a Fairway driver. Y'all might argue it's a distance driver because it's a 10 speed, or a hybrid driver, or a control driver, or whatever. I don't care what you call it. That's just another disc I have in the bag for some redundancy with the Halo Dynasty if I need another like straight to overstable backhand or like a straighter forehand. And now we get into a weird spot in my bag where you can consider these distance drivers, or you can consider them control drivers or hybrid drivers. I don't really care what you want to call them. These are probably my most used distance drivers. So if I want to step up from my Fairways or my 10 speeds, these are the discs that get the most work in my bag. I do have actual distance drivers in my bag, like that 12, 13 speed range, but I don't use them that often, but I do have them, and you know, I'll show you them in a minute. We start off with the Fission Wave. Love the Fission Wave. Nice understable distance driver or control driver, whatever you want to call it. If I throw this thing flat, it's turning pretty much the entire flight. Slide hyzer, it's going to flip up, fly straight, get some like slow turn to the right. If I'm in a situation where I need max distance and there's no wind or a tailwind, this disc is coming out. I can use it for bigger turnovers if I feel like my forehand's not going to get far enough, but I still want that left to right moving shot and get good distance. That's what the Wave's for. So love having the Wave in my bag. Now a tick up in stability from the Wave, but still very understable, are going to be my Halo Mayas. And the Mayas are kind of like a Mystere or maybe like a Crate. It's not quite as understable as a Mamba, like if you're an Innova person. So it's just, it kind of reminds me of like a Neutron or Proton Wave, I guess, as well. But this one is the Lucky Lorenzen Tour Series. This is a lighter weight, like 166 grams. So it flies very similar to the Wave, definitely more of an understable driver, but it has a little bit more integrity because it's in the Halo plastic, which gives it a tick more stability than what a Maya would normally fly like, or, you know, your understable 11 speed of choice or whatever. Nice rim width, doesn't feel too wide in my hands. And so this is, like I said, a lower weight one, 166 grams. So yeah, very similar to the Wave, just a tick more integrity, not as much turn, pans out a little bit better, but still quite understable. And this is more of a matched weight Halo Maya. And so this, again, understable, but just not quite as flippy as this other Maya. Flies a little straighter, has a little bit of fade out at the end, especially if it's not windy or anything like that. But this is good redundancy, just to have the Mayas in the Wave. Those are my understable drivers, and I have 3 of them, and so I can get, you know, good practice throwing understable backhands, essentially with these 2 Mayas in that Wave. And finally, the 2 discs at the end that are on the straighter to slightly overstable end, because again, for me, what is probably a stable or straight disc for you is more overstable for me. And that is going to be this Moonshine Boatman and then this Opto Flow. These are super similar. You know, they're kind of like your Wraith type disc, I guess you could say, in that type of slot. For this Moonshine Boatman, this is just like a true straight 11 speed that has some fade at the end. Doesn't have nearly as much turn as like a Wave or a Maya would have. Mostly just flies dead straight. Doesn't really have much flip up at all unless it's windy. And then it has a nice gentle fade, not overwhelming or anything like that. So this is kind of my main distance driver for getting a nice straight shot with some finish at the end. And maybe a straighter forehand, like a hyzer flip forehand or something like that. This has been in my bag in a while. It's dyed by Tomahawk Dyes, JT Gibbons. And it's been in the bag for a long time. It's pretty and I love throwing it. With this Opto Flow, this is just a tick up in stability from that Boatman. It still flies pretty straight, but it has more finish. And that's mostly because this is like a pre-flight number flow, so it's an older run, so a little more overstable run. And it's super domey, so that dome really just gives it a little bit more stability, but also gives it some good glide. So this is like my main overstable distance driver for backhands, unless there's like a huge headwind or something like that. But I have a lot of control with this because the rim doesn't feel too wide, doesn't feel too much bigger than throwing one of my faster fairway drivers, and just love the flow. Big fan of it. So finally, we get to the true 12 and 13 speed distance drivers in my bag. I don't really throw these a crazy amount unless I am going for max distance, or there's a little bit of wind, or if I need something more overstable than the flow to get that more left finish on a backhand, or mostly for forehands. That's where we're gonna get to these discs. So we start off, we got 2 swords. This is a custom die tournament one from, again, Tomahawk Dyes, JT Gibbons. I lost my original one that you've probably seen in other in the bag videos I've done. That was like just kind of my understable distance bomber sword. Unfortunately, I lost that disc, so I'm kind of trying to beat this one in to become the replacement for that. So this is going to be just like a faster Wave, faster Maya type disc. If you know a sword, it's a nice straight flyer, very neutral, but for higher arm speeds, it is going to have some turn to it. For my arm speed even, it has some good turn to it. So this is probably, if my Wave or my Maya is not my max distance driver, this would be it right here for sure. So really enjoyed the sword. And then I have this really cool dyed VIP one. I think this belonged to Emerson Keith at one point, or he signed it when he was playing for Latitude 64 that I found. And this has just got a little bit more integrity than this one, but these are very similar discs. Basically, if it's not windy out and I need something with some turn, but still kind of pans out and flies straight, maybe a touch of finish at the end, that's when I'm usually going to throw the swords. They're also great tailwind bombers, and again, just like a faster version of my Waves or Mayas for max distance. And I think the other big thing about the sword is that even though it's labeled a 12 speed, the rim does not feel that wide. It feels just as controllable to me as some of my like 10 speeds in my bag. So I think that's another reason I really go to the sword. It's not that wide rim feeling. You know, it doesn't feel like a destroyer with, or obviously nowhere near a nuke, which is crazy wide, or some of those 14 speeds that are out there. So it's just nice and comfortable in my hand. Then finally, we get to my more overstable distance drivers, and these are mostly used for forehands, but I will occasionally use them for backhands if I need like a true overstable distance driver. And so the Emperor is really the main one for that, and the Emperor is essentially a destroyer, just Infinite's version of it. So first I have an iBlend. This is probably, you know, this like mix of base and premium plastic. It's also only 170 grams. So this is actually pretty similar to my swords, but it's just a slightly wider rim and it has a bit more finish at the end. And I can kind of label this closer to an overstable distance driver compared to the swords that don't have as much finish. This actually does have some good fade to it, especially if I throw it on a touch of hyzer. I can also use it for straight forehands, like hyzer flip forehands, and so this is the first Emperor in the bag. It has my logo on it. Then I have two S-Blend or Star Emperors. This is a lighter weight one. This is a closer to max weight one, but pretty seasoned. These are like my true overstable backhand distance drivers. I throw these flat, they're gonna fade left, but they're also great forehand discs. If I throw these flat, I'm gonna get a nice full flight forehand. If I throw it on a hyzer, I'm gonna get a nice forward pushing hyzer forehand. So that's what I really like these two S-Blend Emperors for. Then the final Emperor in the bag is a Halo Emperor, and it's kind of like your Halo Destroyer. It's just a more overstable version of the Emperor. So if I'm fighting a headwind, this is a good disc I can throw on a backhand to fight a headwind with and still get some finish, or I can throw flex forehands with it. Then to finish this thing out completely as far as disc goes, I have two final discs in the bag, and that is the Conqueror, which is essentially the old Discmania PD2 mold. I have a Team Stamp Halo one, and then I have this swirly S-Blend one. Now this one is an absolute meat hook. It's just a faster version of that Lucidex Felon. I can get more distance with it than that Felon, but it is just so damn overstable. I pretty much only use it for like a situation where I need to throw a forehand, but I'm too scared because it's a headwind. This thing doesn't give any cares about a headwind. It is just dumpy, super overstable. This is a utility disc, rarely ever use it. On the other hand, this Halo one, for whatever reason, is actually straighter flying than the normal swirly S-Blend one. Usually it's the other way around and the Halos are more overstable, but for whatever reason with this particular run, this is actually like a manageable one. This is my main forehand driver. If I'm not forehanding the Emperors for distance, or I'm not, forehanding that Halo Emperor for like a more overstable forehand, this is the one where I can just throw it on Annie and it's gonna flex out. So I guess I'll put it to you this way. If I'm trying to throw a forehand for distance, I'm probably gonna throw one of the Emperors, with the Halo being the most overstable and then the S-Blends being a little bit straighter. But if there's like OB on the left or something like that, or water on the left, or there's any chance if I turn it too much I'm gonna get into trouble, that's whenever the Conqueror comes out, because I know that there is no way this disc, with how overstable it is for my arm speed, is ever gonna push too much left. Like I have to really almost throw it vertical to get it to stay left forever. I can throw it on even kind of 45 degrees of Annie, and it is going to still fight out of it, fly straight, and get hard finish. And so this is a disc I can really just smack into with Anheuser, get some straight flight, but then get that reliable fade at the end. And so this is mostly for overstable forehands. I think the only way I would use this on a backhand is for some type of skip shot or fight a massive headwind or something like that. Then I know you see these two discs up here. These are just discs I'm trying to beat in. It's another Sword, it's another Maya, but it's not disc I would normally have in my bag if I was actually playing around during a tournament. But that's going to do it for this. Hope you enjoyed it. I know that I always enjoy in the bag videos, and so I thought maybe people who follow me closely would be curious what I threw. Or if you're just curious, hey, what does an amateur open bag player throw that's sponsored by Infinite? Now you know kind of what I got going on in here. So thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and catch future content. See you soon.